In the small town of Millhaven, nestled deep within a forest that seemed to swallow the sunlight whole, there was a house no one dared to enter. It stood at the edge of the woods, shrouded in twisting vines and shadows, abandoned for decades yet somehow still intact. The locals whispered stories about it, tales of strange noises, flickering lights in the dead of night, and the faintest sound of someone or something breathing inside. The house was called the Blackthorn Manor. It was named after the thorny bushes that grew wild around its perimeter, sharp as razors and impossibly dense. Many had tried to clear the way through those thorns, only to be met with an inexplicable chill that froze their blood and sent them running back to town. One autumn evening, under a sky painted with a sickly orange twilight, a man named Samuel ventured toward Blackthorn Manor. Samuel was a writer, desperate for a story that would pull him out of obscurity. He had heard the rumors and scoffed at them. Ghost stories, he told himself. Old wives' tales. Yet, something about the manor's reputation gnawed at him, a curiosity wrapped in dread that beckoned him forward. As he stepped past the thorn bushes, a gust of cold wind swept through the trees. The leaves rustled like whispers, the sound soft but insistent, as if the forest itself was warning him to turn back. Samuel ignored the sensation and pressed on, feeling the damp earth beneath his boots soften with every step. The front door of Blackthorn Manor was heavy oak, its surface cracked and warped by time. It groaned loudly as Samuel pushed it open, revealing a darkened hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and scattered debris. The air inside was thick with dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sour that made his stomach churn. Samuel flicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the walls. Faint scratches marred the woodwork, as if claws had raked their way through the years. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. He moved deeper inside, his footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. Each room he passed told a story of abandonment, shattered picture frames, furniture draped in dusty sheets, and long-forgotten belongings coated in grime. The house felt like a living relic, a capsule of sorrow and decay. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears, soft, almost imperceptible. It was like a whisper, a breath against the back of his neck. Samuel spun around, shining his flashlight into the empty hallway, but there was nothing there. He chalked it up to nerves and continued upstairs, where the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The wooden stairs creaked underfoot, each step sounding like a protest. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, darkness spilling out from within. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest as he approached. The door opened into what had once been a child's bedroom. A small bed sat against the far wall, its mattress torn and stained. Toys lay scattered across the floor, old dolls with cracked faces, a music box rusted shut. On the wall, faint scratches had been carved into the plaster, forming shapes that made Samuel's skin crawl. There was something unsettling about the patterns, a chaotic geometry that seemed to pulse in the dim light. As he reached out to touch them, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing his flashlight. Darkness engulfed him. Samuel fumbled with the light, his fingers trembling. When it flickered back on, he caught sight of something or someone standing just beyond the doorway. A figure, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Frozen in place, Samuel stared at the apparition. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence filled the room with a suffocating dread. Then, without warning, it vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of decay. Breathing heavily, Samuel backed out of the room, the hairs on his arms standing on end. As he turned to flee down the stairs, the whispering returned, louder now, swirling around him like a tempest. The voices spoke in a language he couldn't understand, low, mournful chants that echoed through the empty halls. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, twisting into shapes that defied reason. Suddenly, the floor beneath him creaked violently. Samuel stumbled, catching himself just before a gaping hole yawned open where the wooden boards had rotted away. The pit descended into darkness, and from its depths came a faint, wet scraping sound. He scrambled back, heart pounding, desperate to escape the nightmare that had become the manor. As he reached the front door, it slammed shut with a thunderous bang, trapping him inside. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent life force, walls closing in, breathing with sinister intent. Samuel's flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. In that void, the whispers turned into screams. Faces appeared in the blackness, twisted and contorted with pain and rage. Hands reached out, cold and grasping, scraping at his skin. Samuel ran blindly, his breath ragged, his mind fracturing under the onslaught. The manor had claimed him, pulling him into its eternal nightmare. When the townsfolk found the house the next morning, the thorn bushes were undisturbed, the manor silent once more. No sign of Samuel remained, only the faintest echo of a scream carried on the wind. And in the heart of Blackthorn Manor, the shadows waited, hungry for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter. Blackthorn Manor was no ordinary house, but Samuel hadn't known that when he first stepped inside. As the shadows swallowed him whole, the air thickened, almost alive with whispered histories and unseen eyes. The house seemed to breathe, its walls pulsating faintly, as if beating with a hidden heart that had not stopped for centuries. His flashlight dead, Samuel's hands searched the cold, rough surface of the walls for any sign of an exit. But the manor's hallways stretched endlessly, twisting and turning in impossible ways. Doors that once should have led to familiar rooms now opened onto narrow stone corridors, damp and crawling with mildew. The smell was thick like earth mixed with rot and something metallic, the scent of old blood long forgotten. As Samuel moved deeper into the labyrinth, the whispers grew louder, clearer. They were not just voices, but memories trapped in the house's very bones. He paused in front of a cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. His reflection stared back, pale and drawn. But behind him, a shadow shifted just beyond the glass, a flicker of movement that vanished when he blinked. Suddenly, the floor trembled beneath his feet. A low groan echoed through the manor, as if the house itself was waking from a long slumber. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and somewhere far below, a slow, dragging sound began. Samuel's heart thundered in his chest. The instinct to flee clashed with an irresistible pull, a need to understand the manor's dark secrets. He knew this place had claimed many before him, but what it wanted, he could not yet guess. Guided by the faintest flicker of light coming from a stairwell below, Samuel descended into the basement. The air grew colder, frost forming on the cracked stone walls, his breath visible in the icy air. The staircase creaked dangerously, threatening to collapse with each step. At the bottom, he found himself in a cavernous room filled with ancient relics and dusty books. A heavy iron chandelier hung from the ceiling, its candles long since melted away. But what drew his eye was an altar in the center, carved with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The altar's surface was stained dark, dried crimson marks that told a silent story of pain and sacrifice. Around it, strange artifacts were arranged in a deliberate pattern: bones, tattered fabrics, shards of broken glass. Samuel's fingers brushed over a leather-bound book resting on the altar. Its pages crackled with age as he opened it, revealing writing in an ancient language he couldn't decipher. Yet the words seemed to pulse in his mind, sinking into his thoughts like a poison. A sudden chill ran down his spine. From the corners of the room, eyes gleamed, reflecting the faint glow like the eyes of unseen predators. The whispers had transformed into voices now, pleading, begging, and sometimes cursing. The room felt alive, a trap set to hold him in place. Samuel's skin crawled as he sensed movement behind the shadows. Figures emerged, ghostly apparitions with hollow faces, twisted by torment and despair. They circled him silently, their mournful eyes locked on his soul. One step forward, its voice a hollow echo: "You should not have come." Panic surged through Samuel's veins. He dropped the book, and it slammed shut with a deafening bang, breaking the spell. The apparitions shrieked and faded into the darkness, but the sense of menace remained. He fled back upstairs. But the manor was no longer the place he had entered. Hallways stretched on endlessly, and the room seemed to shift around him like a maze with no exit. The air was thick with despair, a living fog that blurred his vision and muddled his mind. Time lost meaning in Blackthorn Manor. Hours could have passed or minutes, Samuel couldn't tell. The shadows whispered secrets, some sweet, and others cruel, promising release or eternal torment. In one room, he found a faded portrait of a woman with hollow eyes. As he stared, the eyes seemed to bleed darkness, drawing him in deeper. He reached out, and the room spun violently, throwing him to the floor. When he recovered, he was no longer alone. A child's laughter echoed through the halls, innocent yet chilling, bouncing off the walls like a cruel mockery. Samuel's flashlight flickered back to life, and he shone it toward the sound. There, in a dusty corner, stood a little girl. Her dress was torn and stained, her face pale and expressionless. She held a small, cracked doll in one hand and looked directly at him, eyes empty yet full of sorrow. "Play with me," she whispered. Samuel's breath caught. The air around her shimmered, distorting like a heat haze, and the laughter twisted into a scream that pierced his ears. The girl vanished, leaving behind a coldness that seeped into his bones. He ran, the manor's corridors twisting into nightmares of his own fears. Walls bled, floors cracked open to reveal abyssal pits, and shadowy hands reached from the darkness to grasp at him. Each step was agony, but escape was impossible. Eventually, he found himself in the manor's main hall, where a grand staircase led upward to the attic. Drawn by a force he could not resist, Samuel climbed. The attic was cloaked in darkness, filled with forgotten memories, broken toys, faded photographs, and a small, locked chest. With shaking hands, he pried the chest open. Inside lay a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, bound by a black ribbon. As he unfolded the first letter, the words seemed to writhe and twist on the page, recounting a tragic story of love, betrayal, and madness. The letters spoke of a family torn apart by secrets, of a father obsessed with dark rituals, a mother driven to despair, and children lost to the shadows of the manor. The final letter was a desperate plea for forgiveness, stained with tears and blood. Suddenly, the attic grew unbearably cold. A presence stood behind Samuel, breath icy on his neck. The whispers returned, now voices of the past, mourning their fate and warning him to leave before it was too late. But Samuel was trapped. Blackthorn Manor had claimed his soul, weaving him into its eternal tapestry of horror. His screams joined the chorus of the damned, echoing through the endless halls, waiting for the next curious visitor to answer its silent call. The manor's walls pulsed faintly, a heartbeat beneath the ancient wood and stone. Samuel felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, eyes that had watched the house's terrible history unfold over centuries. His mind reeled with images of past tragedies, fragmentary glimpses of sorrow and rage, all woven into the manor's haunted fabric. The air grew thick with cold mist, swirling around his feet like fingers trying to hold him back. He stumbled through the endless corridors, where the floorboards groaned underfoot as if protesting his every step. The once familiar layout of the house betrayed him. Rooms appeared and vanished, doors led nowhere or opened onto impossible voids. A low hum began to fill the air, a resonance that seemed to emanate from the manor itself. The hum grew into a chant, soft at first, then rising to a crescendo of voices joined in a macabre hymn, incomprehensible yet filled with despair and warning. Drawn toward the sound, Samuel found himself in a vast chamber, the ceiling lost to shadow. Ancient tapestries hung on the walls, their once beautiful patterns now frayed and stained. In the center, a great stone basin rested atop a pedestal, filled with water as black as ink. The water's surface rippled as if stirred by unseen hands. Samuel knelt beside it, and his reflection stared back distorted, gaunt, eyes sunken deep in his face. The image shifted, revealing a glimpse of another world beneath the surface, twisted trees, a sky choked with ash, and figures moving silently through the gloom. Suddenly, the basin's water roiled violently. Pale hands burst from its depths, grasping upward with desperate urgency. Samuel scrambled back as a torrent of water surged forward, drenching him in icy cold. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the basin's surface, now calm once more. Breathing hard, Samuel pressed onward, the manor's song fading into silence. But the shadows clung tighter now, tendrils brushing his skin and whispering secrets meant only for the dead. He came to a library, where rows of ancient tomes lined towering shelves. The books were covered in dust, their titles written in languages both known and forgotten. One book lay open on a lectern, its pages filled with diagrams and spells, rituals to bind spirits, to tear the veil between worlds. Samuel's eyes scanned the text, a dreadful understanding creeping through him. The manor was not merely haunted, it was a gateway, a prison for souls trapped between life and death. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a slow, deliberate tapping coming from the far end of the room. Samuel turned, heart pounding. There, in the dim light, a figure emerged, a man dressed in tattered robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. "You should not meddle," the figure said, voice hollow and distant. "This place devours all who seek its truth." Samuel tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The figure raised a hand, and the room seemed to warp and shift. The shelves twisted into monstrous shapes, books fluttering like wings, their pages slicing the air. Panicked, Samuel fled, bursting through a hidden door into a spiral staircase descending deeper beneath the manor. The stairs were slick with moisture, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and decay. At the bottom, he found a crypt, a chamber lined with stone coffins, each marked with the name of a lost soul. The air was still, yet Samuel felt the presence of those entombed bodies stirring, restless in their eternal sleep. From the shadows, a voice whispered his name, soft and coaxing. "Samuel." The whisper became a chorus, rising to a cacophony of sorrowful cries. The coffins rattled, lids scraping against stone as restless hands clawed their way free. Samuel turned and ran, the crypt filling with spectral figures, tormented faces twisted by suffering, reaching out with cold fingers. He stumbled into a narrow passageway, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing like a weight. At the passage's end, a faint light beckoned. Samuel emerged into a garden, a place of twisted beauty under a blood-red sky. Dead flowers wilted beneath thorny branches, and a fountain bubbled with black water. In the garden's center stood a woman, her eyes deep wells of sorrow and madness. She reached out to him, her voice a mournful song. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Escape the manor no longer. Become part of its story." Samuel's resolve shattered as the garden's shadows crept forward, enveloping him in cold and silence. The cold darkness enveloped Samuel completely, swallowing the last remnants of his will. His breath came in ragged gasps as the woman's outstretched hand grew nearer, pale fingers weaving through the thick mist like threads of ice. Her eyes shimmered with a strange, hypnotic glow, not human, but something far older, a lingering echo of a soul trapped between worlds. As her touch brushed his skin, a sudden jolt shot through Samuel's body, like electricity mingled with a deep, aching sorrow. Visions flooded his mind, flashes of laughter twisted into screams, a family torn apart by betrayal, shadows clawing from the corners of his memory that weren't his own. The manor was alive, a vessel of anguish and despair, and he was becoming part of it. The garden twisted around him, the dead flowers blooming briefly into grotesque shapes before wilting back to blackened husks. The sky above churned, a swirling maelstrom of blood and ash that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the house itself. Samuel tried to pull away, but his feet were rooted to the cracked stone path, cold creeping from the earth beneath him, climbing up his legs like a living frost. The woman's voice whispered again, a haunting lullaby promising release but delivering chains. "Forget the world outside," she murmured. "Here, you belong." A sudden shattering sound echoed through the garden as the ground beneath him fractured. From the fissure emerged tendrils of smoke and shadow, coiling around Samuel like serpents, dragging him down into the abyss. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed instantly by the void. He fell through endless darkness, memories unraveling, his own identity slipping away beneath layers of forgotten pain. Faces flickered in the blackness, children with hollow eyes, mothers weeping silent tears, fathers twisted by madness. They reached for him, pulling him toward the depths of their torment. Finally, he landed in a vast hall, the walls lined with countless mirrors, each reflecting not his image but a different fragment of the manor's tortured past. He watched himself as a boy, a man, a ghost, all trapped in endless cycles of fear and regret. A voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once: "The house takes what it needs. It feeds on memory, on fear, on the desperate hope to escape." Samuel's reflection cracked, splintering into 1,000 shards that cut through the air like knives. Pain blossomed inside him, not physical, but deeper, a tearing of his very soul. Yet somewhere, faint but real, a spark of resistance flickered. He forced himself to stand, to push against the suffocating darkness. The manor was a prison, yes, but every prison had a key. He remembered the book, the leather-bound volume he had dropped in the chamber below. The spells, the rituals to bind and unbind spirits. The letters in the attic, the tragic stories of love and betrayal. The manor had been built to trap something terrible, something that fed on human suffering. Summoning every ounce of strength, Samuel focused on the memory of light the first time his flashlight flickered on, the scent of fresh air outside the manor, the warmth of sunlight on his skin. Slowly, the mirrors began to shatter, each explosion of glass releasing screams and wails that faded into silence. The hall trembled violently, the manor fighting back against his will. Walls cracked, ceilings groaned, and the ground beneath him shook as if the house itself were dying. A final mirror remained, reflecting Samuel's face twisted in determination. He reached out and shattered it, breaking the last of the manor's hold. Light flooded the hall, blinding and pure. The shadows screamed and dissipated like smoke caught in a gale. The manor shuddered, its pulse slowing, its ancient hunger stilled. Samuel found himself standing at the manor's front door, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The thorn bushes had receded, the path clear and inviting. He stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. Behind him, Blackthorn Manor stood silent, a shell of what it once was. But deep within its walls, a faint pulse remained, a heartbeat slowed but not ended, waiting for the next visitor to wander through the thorns. The morning light seemed to carry a fragile promise of peace as Samuel staggered away from Blackthorn Manor, his limbs heavy with exhaustion and his mind swirling with the weight of what he had endured. The thorn bushes, once dense and impenetrable, now lay scattered and broken, as if the house itself had surrendered a small piece of its darkness. The town of Millhaven lay ahead, nestled quietly beneath a sky streaked with soft pink and gold. Yet even as the warmth of dawn kissed the earth, a cold shadow lingered in Samuel's chest, a stubborn ember of dread that refused to be extinguished. The manor's presence clung to him like a second skin, an unseen tether woven deep into his soul. As he crossed the threshold into the town, familiar faces turned toward him with expressions of confusion and concern. Whispers followed in his wake, questions hanging unspoken in the morning air. Samuel tried to respond, but his voice was hoarse, his thoughts tangled in the remnants of the nightmare. He sought refuge in the local inn, a small, weathered building with creaking floorboards and a faint smell of wood smoke. The innkeeper, a kindly woman with tired eyes, offered him a room and a pot of strong tea. Samuel accepted, grateful for the semblance of normalcy. Alone in the dim room, the weight of the night's horrors pressed down anew. Shadows gathered in the corners, flickering with unseen movement. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, but the manor's whispers invaded his dreams. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the woman from the garden, her pale fingers reaching out, her mournful song beckoning him back. The child's laughter echoed through the corridors, faint and distant but never fading. Samuel's mind unraveled as memories from the manor bled into his waking hours. He found himself drawn back to the books, the letters, the spells, fragments of a story he was only beginning to understand. Days passed, each one blurring into the next, marked only by the creeping sense of unease that grew within him. The townspeople spoke less and less, their eyes avoiding his, their smiles tight and forced. It was as if the manor's curse stretched beyond its crumbling walls, reaching out to claim those who dared to seek its secrets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel wandered the edge of the forest. The thorn bushes still bore the scars of his passage, but they seemed to twitch and writhe in the twilight, alive with an unseen hunger. He felt the manor's pull stronger than ever, a voice calling him back into its dark embrace. He knew the truth now, the manor was not simply a place of horror, it was a sentinel, guarding something ancient and terrible buried beneath its foundations. Driven by a mixture of fear and resolve, Samuel returned to the ruins of Blackthorn Manor. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, as if the forest itself conspired to keep him away. But he pushed forward, the weight of knowledge pressing on his shoulders. In the heart of the manor, beneath the altar in the basement chamber, Samuel uncovered a hidden trapdoor. The wood groaned as he forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into pitch black. He lit a candle, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The stairs spiraled down endlessly, the air growing thick with the scent of earth and forgotten secrets. At the bottom, he entered a cavern vast beyond comprehension. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and a subterranean river flowed silently, its waters black and still. Across the cavern, a faint glow shimmered, an altar carved from the living rock, covered in ancient runes pulsating with an eerie light. Samuel approached cautiously. The runes spoke of a binding ritual, a prison for a darkness too great to face. It was here the manor's true secret lay, an ancient entity, bound beneath the earth, its power contained only by the walls above. As he stood before the altar, a tremor shook the cavern. The waters of the river began to churn, and a low growl echoed from the depths. Samuel knew the entity was stirring, sensing the weakening of its bonds. Desperation gripped him as the manor's curse threatened to consume everything. But with trembling hands, he began the ritual, reciting words learned from the leather-bound book, calling upon ancient forces to strengthen the seals. The cavern shook violently, the shadows twisting into monstrous shapes that lunged and roared. Samuel's voice faltered, but he pushed through the fear, determined to keep the darkness locked away. With a final cry, the runes flared bright, and the cavern fell silent. The waters stilled, and the shadows retreated, leaving only the faint hum of ancient power humming beneath the stone. Exhausted but victorious, Samuel climbed the stairs and emerged into the cold night air. The manor stood silent once more, its hunger sated for now. But as he walked away, a faint whisper brushed his ear, a warning carried on the wind: "We wait, always." The whisper clung to Samuel's skin like a chill that would never fade. Even as he put distance between himself and Blackthorn Manor, the house's presence lingered in his every breath, a shadow stitched into the very fabric of his being. The town of Millhaven, with its quiet streets and familiar faces, felt like a fragile illusion, a thin veil between him and the darkness he had barely escaped. That night, in the dim safety of his small rented room, sleep refused to come. The walls seemed to close in, shadows pooling in the corners, twisting and writhing like living things. The faint scent of damp earth and burning wood filled the air, pulling at memories he desperately tried to bury. In his restless mind, the manor's secrets unfurled like a nightmare, replaying in endless loops. The woman's hollow eyes, the child's laughter echoing down empty halls, the endless maze of shifting rooms and corridors, all etched into his consciousness with terrible clarity. He clutched the leather-bound book, its worn pages a lifeline and a curse. The words inside whispered promises and threats in the same breath, ancient spells that blurred the line between salvation and damnation. His fingers trembled as he traced the arcane symbols, feeling their power seep into his skin like venom. Suddenly, a sharp knock shattered the silence. Samuel's heart leapt. No one was supposed to visit at this hour. He hesitated, then rose to the door, peering through the peephole into the dark hallway. No one was there. Only the flicker of a shadow slipping away. A cold draft swept under the door, carrying with it a faint murmur. Samuel pressed his ear to the wood, straining to catch the words. They were fragmented, a broken chant in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. Return, free us, bound forever. Panic surged as the whispers grew louder, circling in his mind like vultures. The manor's curse had followed him, invading his sanctuary, seeking to drag him back into its abyss. Unable to stay, Samuel fled into the night, the streets of Millhaven stretching endlessly before him. The moon hung low, casting pale light on twisted shadows that danced just beyond sight. Every step echoed with the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. He found himself at the edge of the forest once more, where the thorn bushes pulsed faintly, alive with a hunger that no dawn could satisfy. Compelled beyond reason, Samuel crossed the boundary, feeling the cold embrace of the manor's influence tighten around him. Deeper into the woods he went, the trees closing like a cage, branches clawing at his clothes and skin. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and forgotten sorrow. The whispers became a chorus, voices rising and falling in a haunting melody of despair. Ahead, through the tangled undergrowth, a faint light flickered soft and beckoning. Samuel approached cautiously, heart pounding. The light revealed a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. In the center of the circle lay a small, ornate box, bound with iron and sealed with a lock of twisted silver. Samuel's breath caught as he reached out, fingers brushing the cold metal. The moment he touched it, the world around him shuddered. The shadows surged forward, coalescing into shapes both human and monstrous. Faces twisted with pain and rage pressed close, their voices rising in a deafening chorus. "Release us." The box vibrated, the lock clicking open as if by its own will. Samuel hesitated, then lifted the lid. A burst of darkness spilled forth, swirling like smoke and filling the forest with a terrible cold. From the shadows emerged figures, souls long trapped by the manor's curse, now freed but not at peace. Their eyes burned with fury and sorrow as they turned toward Samuel, their chains broken but their torment unending. The earth trembled beneath his feet as the forest twisted and groaned. Samuel realized with horror that in freeing them, he had unleashed a force far greater and darker than the manor itself. Desperation overtook fear as he fled back toward Millhaven. The wailing spirits close behind, their cries tearing at the night. The town's lights blinked uncertainly, shadows stretching like tendrils to snatch the unwary. Samuel knew the battle was far from over. The manor had been just the beginning, the prison for an ancient evil now loose in the world. And somewhere, in the deepest darkness, the manor waited, its pulse slow but steady, ready to call him back once more. The night air was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant howl of a wolf somewhere deep in the woods surrounding Millhaven. Samuel's feet pounded the cold, cracked pavement as he fled through the empty streets, the mournful cries of the freed spirits still echoing in his ears like a relentless storm. Each breath came ragged, the cold air burning his lungs, but the dread that pressed against his chest was far worse than any physical pain. Behind him, shadows shifted and stretched unnaturally, flickering just beyond the reach of street lamps and moonlight. The veil between worlds had thinned, and Samuel knew that the spirits, no longer bound to the manor or its crypt, sought vengeance or release, he wasn't sure which. The town was different now. The familiar landmarks seemed distorted, as if viewed through a twisted mirror. Windows that should have reflected the calm interior of homes instead showed flickering images of despair. Doors creaked open and shut of their own accord. The air was charged with restless energy, an invisible storm brewing beneath the surface. Samuel's mind raced, desperate for a solution, for any kind of hope. The book he had clutched for so long was his only guide, but the spells inside were fragmented and incomplete, written by unknown hands in a language that shifted as he read, elusive and ever-changing. He felt a growing urgency, a ticking clock counting down to some inevitable catastrophe. He reached the old church on the hill, its silhouette stark against the dying light of night. The building had long been abandoned, its windows boarded and stained with time. Yet something about it called to him, a faint pulse like a heartbeat in the silence. Inside, dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight, and the scent of ancient wood and damp stone filled the air. The pews were overturned, the altar shattered, but in the center of the ruined sanctuary lay a single candle, flickering with an unnatural flame. Samuel approached, the hairs on his arms rising as the flame danced in impossible patterns. Around the candle, symbols were etched into the floor, complex and ancient, glowing faintly with a pale blue light. As he stepped into the circle, the air grew heavy, and a voice whispered from the shadows. It was the woman from the manor's garden, her face pale and sorrowful, eyes like deep wells of despair. "You cannot run," she said softly. "The darkness is not just here, it is in you now." The candle's flame flared, and the room was filled with visions, memories not his own, centuries of pain and betrayal etched into the walls and floors. He saw the founding of the manor, the dark rituals performed in secrecy, the sacrifices made to contain a power too great to wield. Samuel fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the flood of knowledge and emotion. The woman knelt beside him, her touch cool against his cheek. "But there is a way," she whispered. "A sacrifice to bind the darkness forever. But it demands a price." He looked up, determination burning in his eyes despite the fear and exhaustion. If he was to save Millhaven, to end the curse that had claimed so many, he would pay any price. The woman's form began to fade, her voice a fading echo. "Remember, the light can only hold the shadow for so long." Samuel rose, the candle's flame dimming as the dawn crept through the broken windows. The battle was far from over, but the path was clear. He would return to the manor once more, to the place where all the horrors began, and face the darkness in its heart. The first light of dawn seeped weakly through the crack-stained glass windows of the ruined church, casting fractured colors onto the cold stone floor where Samuel knelt, clutching the ancient book. The pages seemed to pulse faintly, alive with the dark knowledge it contained. The woman's fading warning echoed in his mind, a grim reminder that the light could only hold the shadow for so long. Despite the weight of exhaustion pulling at his limbs, Samuel knew there was no rest for him yet. The manor's curse was not a chain easily broken, and the spirits he had inadvertently released prowled freely now, their hunger insatiable. He stepped out into the grey morning, the town of Millhaven still cloaked in an eerie quiet, as if the very air held its breath. The houses that once seemed safe now loomed ominously, windows staring blankly like vacant eyes. The townsfolk were nowhere to be seen, vanished, or hiding, Samuel could not tell which. Determined, he made his way to the local library, hoping to find more clues in the town's forgotten records. The building was old, its heavy oak door creaking as he pushed it open. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by the quiet scratch of his footsteps on the wooden floor. Rows of books stretched endlessly, many worn and yellowed with age. Samuel's fingers traced the spines, searching for anything related to the manor, the dark rituals, or the ancient entity bound beneath the earth. Hours passed as he pored over diaries, town records, and arcane tomes. Fragmented accounts revealed a horrifying history. The manor had been built atop a site sacred to an ancient cult, one devoted to a god of shadows and despair. The rituals performed there were meant to imprison this entity, but with each generation, the bindings weakened. One journal, belonging to a woman named Illyra Blackthorn, daughter of the manor's founder, caught his attention. Her entries detailed a growing madness within the family, whispers in the night, and a desperate plan to seal the darkness once and for all, even at the cost of their own lives. Her final entry spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the manor, a place untouched by time, where the heart of the entity pulsed like a dark star. Armed with this knowledge, Samuel returned to the manor, now battered and decayed but still radiating a terrible power. The sky had darkened once more, clouds swirling with unnatural speed as if warning the world of the coming storm. He descended the stairs to the basement chamber, heart pounding. The air was thick and heavy, suffused with a darkness that seemed to suck the light from his very soul. There, beneath the shattered altar, he found a hidden door Illyria had described. Pushing it open revealed a narrow passage spiraling downward into abyssal blackness. Lighting a torch, Samuel ventured into the depths, the walls closing in as the air grew colder and thicker with each step. At the passage's end, he found a chamber vast and cavernous, lit by an eerie phosphorescence emanating from the walls themselves. In the center stood an altar carved from stone, covered in ancient runes that pulsed with a slow, sinister rhythm. Before him, the entity waited, a swirling mass of shadows coalescing into a form both monstrous and alluring, eyes burning like dying stars. Its voice echoed inside his mind, a symphony of despair and temptation. "Release me," it whispered. "Free me from these chains and together we shall reign." Samuel's breath caught, the darkness pressing against his will. But he remembered Illyria's sacrifice, the countless souls trapped and lost to the manor's hunger. Raising the book, he began the counter-ritual, chanting the ancient words of binding. The chamber trembled as the entity thrashed and roared, shadows lashing out like serpents. Light and darkness battled in a cosmic struggle, the very fabric of reality strained beneath their clash. With a final cry, Samuel sealed the entity back into its prison, the runes flaring brightly before fading to a cold, steady glow. Exhausted beyond measure, he collapsed to the floor as silence reclaimed the chamber. Above ground, the storm broke, rain washing away the dust and grime of the manor's decay. Dawn's light bathed the earth in hope. But deep within the earth, the pulse of darkness continued, a slow, steady heartbeat that would wait patiently for the next time the bindings weakened, the next visitor brave or foolish enough to enter Blackthorn Manor. The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, washing over the crumbling stones of Blackthorn Manor as Samuel staggered out into the dawn-lit yard. The storm had swept away the thick fog that had clung to the trees and twisted vines like a suffocating shroud, revealing the manor's grotesque silhouette beneath the pale morning sky. Though the oppressive weight of the darkness had lifted for now, Samuel felt an unshakable chill deep within his bones, a lingering echo of the malevolent force he had faced. His hands trembled as he clutched the soaked leather-bound book, its pages warped and delicate. The words inside whispered promises of protection and warnings of doom, an uneasy balance between salvation and the ever-looming threat. He glanced back once at the manor's shattered windows, where shadows still flickered faintly, like dying embers refusing to fade. The town of Millhaven lay silent beyond a tree line, its streets empty and still as though holding its breath after a terrible storm. Samuel knew that although the manor's curse had been bound anew, the scars it left on the land and its people were far from healed. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the darkness waited patient and unyielding. As he made his way down the overgrown path toward the road, memories of the ordeal pressed against him like a tide threatening to drown his resolve. Faces of those lost in the manor's grasp flickered before his eyes, the child's hollow laughter, the woman's mournful eyes, Illyria's desperate courage. Their stories were stitched into the very fabric of the house, bound by blood and sorrow. Suddenly, a distant sound shattered the fragile quiet, a low, guttural growl echoing from the woods beyond the town. Samuel froze, heart hammering, senses straining. The storm had passed, but the darkness it unleashed was far from gone. From the shadowed tree line, two glowing eyes appeared, reflecting the pale light like twin lanterns of malice. The creature stepped forward, its form massive and distorted, half shrouded in smoke and mist. It was a twisted embodiment of the manor's curse, part beast, part shadow, its breath ragged with ancient fury. Samuel's pulse surged as the creature lunged, the earth trembling beneath its weight. But this time, he was ready. The book in his hand seemed to pulse with energy, a beacon of light amid the growing darkness. Chanting the ancient words, he raised his voice against the beast's roar, weaving spells of banishment and protection. The air crackled with power as the creature faltered, shadows unraveling from its form like threads of smoke in the wind. With a final, ear-splitting howl, it dissolved into the mist, leaving only silence behind. Exhausted but alive, Samuel sank to his knees, the weight of the battle pressing down on him like a mountain. The manor's curse was far from ended, but he had fought its darkness and lived to tell the tale. As dawn broke over Millhaven, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and rose, Samuel knew one thing with absolute certainty: some shadows never truly vanish. They wait, patient and hungry, just beyond the edge of light. And Blackthorn Manor would always be there watching, waiting, hungry for the next soul to wander into its grasp.